Discover PowerShell. Welcome to another session. Today we're going to talk about the basics of remoting, briefly about the DCOM, the RPC remoting, which has been available for quite some time, and the WS-man remoting, which is available since PowerShell version 2. I'll show you how to enable the remoting, just the real basics of it, and then how to use a one-to-one and a one-to-many scenario, and then how we can disable the remoting and revert back to before we did enable remoting. And some books that you should check out. I'm not going to cover too deep on the remoting, especially with troubleshooting. I would recommend you check out the PowerShellBooks.com website. They updated the secrets of PowerShell remoting here in February, and it's a free book. And then Administrator's Guide to PowerShell Remoting, a few years old, still a great resource. I recommend checking those out. It's going to cover things that I'm not going to talk about today, and just the more you read about it, the more you'll understand in your environment how you can set it up. We're going to assume today that you're in a domain, and all the communications are through Active Directory. So let's get it started. So let's run a command that would use the DCOM protocol. So most commands that have the computer name parameter are going to use the DCOM RPC protocol. So I would just put in my server name, and it returns the results. Now, if you had several servers, for example, let me run it against the same one. Okay, see here it ran back to back, and this works fine in most cases. If you're just chilling at your desk, running a couple commands, this is a great command to run. If you find that in your network you're locking down the servers, they're hardening the security, and you're trying to limit access to a server, well, you may find that a firewall would block commands such as get process, not the command specifically, but the protocol that's being used, the ports that are open. So uh, it's obviously going to be a concern whether or not you can use any of the PowerShell features in terms of communicate with other box, but more than likely this will just work right out of the box. There shouldn't be any kind of red flags. And so get process, that's just a real well-known command. You could run get service, that also has a computer name parameter. And if you want to find out all the commands that have it, you can run the get command with the parameter of parameter name, and then type in the computer name. And you can use this for any of the parameters that you're searching for in any of the commands. But right now we want to know about computer name. And so all the commands that are available on this machine right now, this is what would use that parameter, which would use more than likely the DCOM RPC protocol. Alright. And get WMI is another very well-known command. And see, it's looking for a class, so I'm going to enter just something that comes to mind. And so it shows that on the domain controller I've got two disks available. And this one, let's see, it's a drive type 5, which is a CD-ROM, and a drive type 3, which is a fixed disk, the local disk. And so this command, once again, it just works fine. There are limitations, so I've seen blogs where people have posted about this type of remoting and the new PowerShell remoting, which is the WS-man remoting, and how they've saved time. The remoting was much faster when it came to WS-man. So what is WS-man? Well, WS-man is the web service for management protocol, and then WinRM is the service that is an implementation of the WS-man protocol. So it's a Microsoft protocol. It is open, so they've made it available. The documentation on how it can be implemented in other environments, that's all available online. If you're interested in it, look it up. So with WS-man, it's going to use a total different setup, and the commands are going to be different. So let's just get started. So if I want to enable remoting on this box, so Windows 7, 2008, 2008 R2, remoting is available, it's just not enabled. So when PowerShell version 2 came out, it just wasn't configured right out of the box. When you get to Windows 8 and Server 2012, remoting is enabled by default, and that's by design. Uh, you're going to find that many of the new tools that are coming out that communicate with PowerShell, they're actually running commands through remoting on top of PowerShell, and like the server manager that's built on top of PowerShell. So enable needs to be remoting needs to be enabled. So we're just going to assume that we've got the green light. We're going to enable the remoting on the box. All you do is enter enable PS remoting and hit enter. It's going to start off telling me what's going to happen when it enables remoting. So it's going to start the WinRM service, which is the Windows Remoting Management Framework service, whatever. And then it's going to set the service to automatic. It's going to create a listener for any IP address. And that's another thing that you can configure if you want to limit the IP addresses that can communicate with the box. And it's going to create a rule in the firewall to allow traffic through a specific port, 5985. If you wanted, and that's for HTTP only. If you wanted to go through HTTPS, that's a more advanced setup. It's not, there's no automatic configuration for that, and that would be port 5986. Once again, if you refer to the Secrets of PowerShell Remoting books, then it'll cover that kind of stuff, and it's just really great, a great read. So we're going to say yes, and real quick before we continue with this message box, it says it updated to receive requests. The service type was configured to automatic, and it was started. And then it was updated to listen on all IP ranges. And then it's going to, here, we're going to enable a PS session configuration. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And so I'll go ahead and say yes, I've enabled it. And it's going to do another one, and another one, and then we're done. So the session configurations have to do with when you are communicating through remoting, which configuration is used to set up that connection. And you could do some delegated administration where you create a configuration custom to what commands you want available or what access you want available. And that's a whole nother topic, a whole nother video. So now that we've enabled the remoting, let's look at a one-to-one remoting. So a one-to-one remoting is like a telnet session. You're going to communicate directly with a computer, whether it be a desktop machine or a server, and you're going to use the enter PS session command. And then we're going to provide it the computer name, and since I only have the one server, we're going to connect to that guy. And as you can see, it shows my local path on that server, and then it tells me which server I'm connected to. So it's the same name that I entered here. Okay, if I do get process, it returns me all the processes on that server. If I do get service, it's all the services on that server. So just remember that when you're in the one-to-one session, that anything that you're typing into the console is happening on that box. It's as if you were sitting there, logged in, maybe the box was at your desk, you've got screens attached to it, and you're typing. This is how it works. Okay? And then if you want to get out of that session, you can use the exit PS session, and now you're back to your machine. Okay? And that's the most basic way to do it. So that was an explicit remoting. Now, if we go back to the enter PS session, you'll notice that there's a session parameter. There are several commands that support the session parameter. When should you use computer name? When should you use session? If I was just to, like I did, I just connected one server, run some commands, and I exit, and that's all I was going to do, then using the computer name is great. If you're wanting to run commands against many servers, and so therefore you'd be creating many connections repeatedly, then you're going to want to use the session parameter. Okay, so how do I use the session parameter? You create a new PS session. That's going to take a computer name. Okay, and you can provide specific credentials. The throttle limit, that's a real popular one. That has to do with how many connections are made simultaneously. So you'll find in a moment we'll run another command, and those commands are running in parallel. So if you had 100 servers, these commands are running in parallel. So the throttle limit, which has a default value, I believe, of 32, will limit how many servers or client machines are communicated with at any given time. And I would recommend leaving at the default throttle limit, and then if you find that your network doesn't have the bandwidth, you can dial it down, or if you feel that your servers can handle it, you can throttle it up. And then there are many other parameters that are worth checking out at a later time. So create a new session. I'm going to go ahead and create a session variable, and it's just a variable, and I'm saving my session into that variable. And what that's going to allow me to do is I can have that session just sitting in the console session, and anytime I want to run a command, I can refer to that variable. So if I did PS session, I can provide it the variable name, and it will connect to that same server again. So very simple. Exit PS session, no parameter needed. And so that's a one-to-one. Very easy. If you just need to check out something on one server or one client machine, like if you're doing some kind of support for the device, like let's say you were going to evaluate some sort of power setting issues, well, a one-to-one session is perfect for that. And now the one-to-many is probably the most popular one, because it allows you to manage many servers at one time. So we've created the new session, and I'm going to call Invoke Command and provide it the session. And then it has a script block parameter which allows you to execute that command, get process, on whatever servers or client machines are defined in the session here. So when I run it, I'll get an automatic variable, or automatic property added to the result set. It's the computer name. So if I had more than one, and you know what, I'm going to go ahead and connect or add the local server, the local device to this session. So I'm just going to go ahead and replace the session variable, and see, yep. So now you should see the localhost listed. So this is great because as the results are spilling out, and let's say you're saving it to a CSV or whatever you're doing with it, you have this variable, you have rather the property available in the result set, helps you filter out and helps you know which one it's associated with. As you saw earlier, if I did the get process and 2008 R2, it doesn't have that available. So, that's a nice little feature there. Okay, well, Invoke Command is, for me, one of the most popular commands to use. It's a very generic command. It says, hey, run some command, in this case a script block, against a computer name or a session, and all the data comes back. If you wanted to run it and not tie up the console, you could set it as job. Then it'll generate a new job. You could do get job. Oh, looks like it's completed. Get job. I want to do an ID of 4. I could have done just get job, but whatever. And then when you do receive job, you get the results back. However, now once you've done receive job and all the data has been returned, and you can tell that by here, it says has more data. Nope, there's no more data, so all the data has been returned. If there was lots of data coming back, well, then it would continue to say true until you've depleted all the data. Once you've done this, once it says has more data, no, and receive job doesn't receive anything anymore, well then you could do get job for and remove job, which is there. Okay, now if I do get job, we're gone, cleaned up, good. Okay, so invoke command, let's talk a little bit more about that. So as you can see here, the script block contains whatever commands that you're wanting to do in there. You could have done file path, which would be a script that would have that the local device that you're communicating with. So this, in this case, the domain controller, it would be a relative path to that server or an absolute path on that server. So if I did, something like this, then that would be on that server. And as you can see here, it does not exist. So if I wanted to create it on the server, then go ahead and create it, and then when I run it, so this could be applicable like maybe you've got a custom startup script and you didn't want to create a GPO for it, then you could run this command on a startup or whatever you want to do. So invoke command is really easy to use. This is where you would do the one-to-many. There is a so this would be called a fan out or one-to-many. Then there's a fan in, which would be many to one per se. It would be something similar to you have 10 technicians and they're all connecting to one computer trying to solve a problem. Then you could have, um, let's say, each of your technicians create a remote session and it would use one of the default session configurations to connect, or they could provide a specific one to connect to, so they could only be limited to a specific set of features, a specific set of commands on the box. And once again, that's something that we'd cover later on. Then that would be just an effective and efficient way to manage that computer. And that's once again, that's called a fan in. And if we wanted to see all the commands that support the session, and parameter name and session. So as you can see, there's the inner PS session that we used earlier, invoke command, new PS session, the receive job. So I could have called receive job from a specific session. That would have been, I think that might be a version 3 feature, I'm not sure. I didn't really use that in version 2. Okay, so another thing for you to explore. Now, let's say that we want to disable the remoting. Well, there is a disable remoting command. And yes, you want to, yes. And yes. And yes. And yes. And now it tells me that I have to manually undo the changes by following these steps. Okay. Well, yeah, I can go ahead and do that, and that's great. I went ahead and did an advance, so let's go here. So I've disabled remoting. If I had used the force parameter, I wouldn't have seen any of those boxes. If I run it again, see, spits that out, and nothing popped up. Now, this has to do with the listener that was for all ports. So I'm going to go ahead and, or rather all IP addresses. So that's been removed. Then I want to stop the service, and I want to disable the service, and then basically toggle off that local account token filter policy. So now if I try to do remoting, so if you remember, the session contained a reference to the local host, and now it seems to be hung up on the local host. See, attempting to reconnect to localhost. So it's going to show that when it's unable to connect. And the great thing about the invoke command is because it's running in parallel, if you had 200 servers and some are down, or the remoting is not enabled, well, you're going to have a queue of 32 and they're all running in parallel, and some are on hold or going to time out, and so you can get a mini done. If you're using the decom approach, it's, if I understand correctly, it's going to run serially, and so if there's a delay of 10 seconds on every server, well then it's gonna just compound every time it tries to connect to a new server, and that's where you could experience 6 hours delay to run some simple command to receive processes. Let me go ahead and stop that. So I'm gonna do Control C. Nope, still stopping. And I want to go ahead and enable the remoting. As soon as it's done, it's not done. Okay, so I'll do it in the console real quick. And I'm going to do A. A. So once again, it set up the service, set up the listener, and then set up the configurations on the box. Okay. If I were to go ahead and run that last command, there we go. What's it doing? Run space is broken. Oh, that's interesting. Well, let me close this out. I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm going to close it and open it back up. And I like my spaces. And it worked. Ta-da! Okay, some great uses with Invoke Command. Let's say I had my command and I was going to have it run on many servers. Well, I can initially set up a script that would run, like get process, get service. But then how do you get that into the script block for this guy right here? So, all in one line is kind of difficult to read. So I'm going to create a script block, and you can do something like that if you like. I normally leave it off because the little curly braces without the alias symbol just implies that it is script block. So I want to do get process, and then I want to get service, and let's say I want to get disk space. And if I remember this right, I only want to know that the local disk. Okay, so as we saw earlier, get WMI, object, get process, get service, they all support the computer name parameter. So I can do that. However, when this command runs, when this script block is executed, it's going to be running local to the machine that I'm connecting to. So I don't need to use a computer name parameter in the script block. So if I do this guy, and I want to run it against the server, and the script block, I do not need the squiggly brackets. I just put in my variable. If you put in the squiggly brackets, it evaluates commands. So we'll check that out real quick. So see, it did nothing, right? Let me try this. See, it just evaluated it, but it didn't execute it. So if I take, oh no, okay. So if I take this guy out, dum 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 dum. See, we're good to go. So it ran everything sequentially on that server, but had I had other servers listed like Web01, SQL01, it would have run those in parallel. Now let's try running against the same server. And I want to output it as a job. Doop, 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 doop. Get job. It's completed. Get job. Receive job. and then did it again, and we're done. So that was easy. There's something new in version 3, which is, in my thought, a replacement for the getWMI object. And so WMI is I forgot what it's called, but that was Windows implementation or Microsoft's implementation of the SIM commands or the SIM protocol, which is the Common Information Model. And it's worked well. Some people liked it, some people didn't like it. Sometimes it's confusing, sometimes it's easy to use. I'm not sure when it's easy to use. And so the SIM commands are now in version 3, and it's intended to be used across Windows and non-Windows environments. So let's just jump right into there. We can do get sim instance and the class name. So as you can see, like get WMI object and then class. I can do Win32 logical disk, and I'm trying to test out the tab completion. So see, we have tab completion, which you do not have in the get WMI object. So we've got that, and I want to do a filter. And let's run it. Okay, same results. So just so you can see how close they are. Not all commands are going to be exactly the same, but for much of what you would have done in the WMI object commands, it's going to work the same. In terms of like get sim instance, there's a set sim instance. It's going to work different than how you would have used get WMI object. Get WMI object doesn't have a pair set WMI object, so they try to take out some of the weird things that were happening. Even though it's a breaking change, it allows you to do something that's much easier to work with. So run them back to back. As you can see, the results are similar yet different. Here it, well, in this case, when it returned just a 1, it put it in a table, and now it's a list, so it seems to have grouped them together and spit it out as a list. Let's see, if I do get member, how do they look different? Okay, so with the get WMI object, it's going to return, many properties, some of which are these retarded ones with double underscore. Didn't really make much sense to have that. So in the get sim instance commands, they got rid of it, which is great, because if you didn't need it, then why return it and why confuse people with it? So I think they did a good job. Give them a pat on the back. Now, one cool thing about the get sim instance is, or the get sim commands, or the set sim commands, what have you, they support a session, sim session, which supports a, where is it at? Oh, session option is what I'm looking for. So what's a session option? Well, I'm glad you asked. If I create a new sim session, a lot of great options. The two that are most important right now have to do with the protocol. And so here we have the option of using DCOM, which I spoke about earlier, or the WSMan. And okay, well, I was wrong about 2. It's just the 1 that I care about. So I can create a new sim session. Why would I want to do that? Well, let's say you have some 2003 servers and 2008 servers. Well, 2003 servers, you, in some cases, you might have to use the DCOM protocol. So, for example, I've got a web server 2003. For some reason, when I try and use remoting, it doesn't work, and it has to do with some command set SPN that was set on the server and it just can't connect. But I have a build box that's 2003, and the WSMan remoting works fine. So for whatever reason you have, the sim session option is great because you can configure some servers connect with one protocol, some servers connect with another protocol. Well, how would you do that? So let's say I created my sessions object, and I want to make it an array. And I want to make an array because um, the sessions, the new sim session command doesn't support like an addition, like numbers or strings where you can concatenate it doing plus equals or plus. So I'm going to add it to an array, and then the getSim instance will accept an array. And just so I can show you what I'm talking about, let's see, parameter sim session, and the name of it is getSim instance. So sim instance accepts an array of sim sessions. So I want to add those together. And so we'll begin with decom option, and we'll have wsman. I don't know what I'm typing. And we'll do the wsman. So if I create a new sim session and I give it the computer name Win 2008 R2 DC and session option, do decom, and a new sim session, and we'll do wsman. So I'm going to add that to the session and this one as well. So let's see that this works real quick. Okay, no errors. Oh, but I ran the whole thing like a doofus. Let me run this again. Do my F8. Okay, created it. If I check the session, okay, return my two sessions. Then I can do get sim instance with the sim session, which accepts an array of sessions. I probably could have named the variable differently. And I want to get the disk drives again. And in version 3 of the ISE, you can just click anywhere in that line and hit F8 and it'll run that command. So since it's the same server, then everything's duplicated. But as you can see, both commands return successfully, or rather, this command returned successfully for each session that was available using both protocols. So that was fairly straightforward. And can't think of anything else to talk about right now, but perhaps I'll have a part 2 and I'll go more in depth about the PowerShell remoting and some ways to troubleshoot. We'll see. Hope you have a great day.